All right, I want to bring in our legal panel now to break all of this down. Joseph Moreno is a former federal prosecutor with the Justice Department, and Jesse Weber is a NewsNation legal contributor. Thank you, gentlemen, both for being with us. Joseph, the decision was unanimous. I take it it's not really a surprise at all, is this?
Hi, Elizabeth. No, it's not. I mean, this case was always a real stretch to begin with. As you pointed out, lack of case law, plain English reading of the 14th Amendment. But then when we heard the very skeptical questions from the Supreme Court justices a few weeks ago, I think that just kind of sealed it. I don't think anybody thought this was going to go in Colorado's favor, and sure enough, it didn't. It was always an uphill battle, and I feel like Donald Trump's been handed a victory now, and I think, to your point about people thinking he's an existential threat, that is a matter of opinion, and people have very strong opinions about that. But to bring a case that's weak, I think he's been now handed this victory that really, at the end of the day, was sort of a foregone conclusion.
Yeah. Jesse, the three liberal justices on the court expressed frustration at what they said was the majority's, quote, needless overreach.
Right.
Because they said, in essence, Congress needs to do this. Are they right? I mean, because we also then had a single opinion from Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who also seemed very concerned about the tenor and tone of the political rhetoric right now and the deep divisions in the country.
Right. So what Justice Amy Coney Barrett said is, look, we're all unanimous. That should be the takeaway from today. But the liberal justices made a good point as well. They said, look, we all agree that this decision makes sense because if you had one state saying Donald Trump was disqualified and another state saying he's not disqualified, it would create chaos. They said the majority went too far. They said that the majority has now ruled that the only way Congress could actually disqualify a candidate for presidency is they have to enact some sort of law, some sort of legislation. Now, why is that a concern? Because there's been a conversation that, okay, if you accept Congress now as the only beacon to disqualify a president, what happens if Donald Trump becomes the president and it's January 2025? Could Congress, without passing any law, say, we're not going to certify the votes, we think he's an insurrectionist? Based on the ruling today, since they would say you'd have to have passed a law beforehand. If they didn't, Congress wouldn't have the ability to do that. So, in other words, they're saying the majority has now tied the hands of Congress, that the only way you could disqualify the president is if they institute some law. They disagree with that, but they agree overall that the Colorado and no state can ban the president.
Yeah, the chaos of having every state deciding something different. Joseph, the court did not question any of the factual findings of the Colorado State Supreme Court about Trump's role in his supporters' storming of the Capitol on January 6th. How significant is that?
Well, it's not surprising. I mean, appellate courts really look to laws and question about legal conclusions, and they leave the fact-finding to lower courts in most cases altogether. And, Jesse's analysis is absolutely correct. The only thing I would add, though, as an end note to that is that Congress has passed a law. There is a criminal statute that criminalizes insurrection, and Jack Smith was perfectly free to charge Donald Trump with that, and he didn't. Nor did he charge any of the 1,200 rioters from January 6th. So I think he had a way to do this. He didn't, and I think we would all agree that had Trump been charged and convicted of the federal crime of insurrection, then this would have been an easy decision in the opposite direction. He would have been barred. And so there is a path to do it. And I think by saying, well, let the states kind of decide as they see fit was never really a tenable argument.
Right. Well, that brings me to the next question, because this decision comes less than a week after the Supreme Court announced that it would hear arguments on whether President Trump is immune from prosecution on any of all crimes that he's charged with. The court in that case set a hearing in 2 months. Now, in this case, they held a hearing in half that time and ruled 1 month later. Why did the court move so quickly in the Colorado ballot case and so much more slowly in the immunity case, given that it goes right to the heart of what you just said? This decreases exponentially the chances that there ever will be a trial of fact and whether or not he is guilty of insurrection.
Well, I think there was a more of a timeliness argument here because ballots are about to be finalized for primary races. And so there was a need to get this done quickly in terms of whether or not states can ban federal candidates from the ballot. With respect to the immunity issue, that really just goes to Jack Smith's prosecution of Donald Trump on the January 6th case. And that can happen, frankly, anytime. And so I understand that prosecutors wanted to move faster, that it's done before the election. And Donald Trump has every desire to make this prolonged as long as possible, preferably after the election.
Right.
But basically, that's kind of why there wasn't that time of the essence issue with the immunity matter.
Jesse, do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, well, I think it's also, you could make the argument that this was a simpler question to decide. I think every legal analyst that was looking
But why couldn't they schedule this next court hearing in a week? Why do they need 2 months?
I think Joseph made a great point in terms of the timing of this with Super Tuesday. Look, the question about the justices taking up the immunity issue, I think we can all agree that that they should decide it. The fact that they've scheduled it for April and there's a possibility they won't issue end of April and there's a possibility they won't issue a decision until June, you can criticize the court for that because in a way you're saying their decision is affecting the prosecution of Donald Trump. It is their purview. Now, I will tell you that when it comes to the immunity issue, I think everybody can agree they're not going to come back and say that a president has absolute immunity. There is a discrete issue about whether or not the former president, was acting within the scope of his duties. There is an argument to be made there. Now, whether or not they're actually going to say he was acting within the scope of his duties, whether he had a right to oversee the certification of votes, we will see. But I will just tell you that I think that this situation was a clear-cut case. I can't say the same thing for the immunity issue.
No,
I'll wait
the immunity, right. And the argument, of course, from opponents of Donald Trump is that by merely delaying the case, you hand in the victory because the case is on hold until the Supreme Court rules. And therefore might not happen before the election.
And by the way, even if the issue is decided and said he's not immune and the trial starts in August, jury selection, motions, this trial wouldn't happen. Yeah.
All right. Jesse Weber, Joseph Moreno, great discussion. Thank you both so much. Really appreciate it.
You got it.
All right. And of course, NewsNation will have live special coverage of Super Tuesday results tomorrow night. Join me and the NewsNation team starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. Huge stack of delegates at stake in the polls tomorrow. All right. Coming up, as talk of Gaza